Good evening. You're watching the late news on HKIBC. I'm Johanna. Here are tonight's top stories. COVID cases in Hong Kong surged to a new high, with the record likely to be broken again tomorrow. An SAR delegation is set to meet mainland officials for talks on the fifth wave. And long queues for COVID tests continue, despite ticketing machines at 10 centers. COVID infections in Hong Kong have jumped to another record amid fears that a new high may be set tomorrow because of a large number of preliminary positive cases. The spike has raised fears that hospitals and quarantine centers are quickly running out of space as fresh outbreaks grip care homes for the elderly and hospitals. After dipping below 1,000 yesterday, COVID cases in Hong Kong soared to a new high today. There were 1,325 infections, and only 2 were imported. Most were of the Omicron variant. There's concern that confirmed cases will surge tomorrow, as there were 1,500 preliminary positive cases. COVID claimed 2 more lives, an 86-year-old man in Yan Chai Hospital and an 88-year-old woman in Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The man had been vaccinated. 5 people have died so far as Hong Kong grapples with the 5th COVID wave. 2 patients are in critical condition, while 11 others were classified as severe. More staff and residents of care homes for the elderly have been sent to quarantine after new infections were detected in 9 centers. This included the online branch of Phyto Home for the Aged in Tuen Mun. 2 people there tested preliminary positive, while some had positive results from rapid tests. Around 40 people will be isolated. So far, 35 homes for the elderly have been affected in the current wave. There were also outbreaks in 2 hospitals. 6 patients in Sha Tin Hospital's medical wards tested positive, while Tuen Mun Hospital's gynecology and obstetrics department logged 3 infections and 10 close contacts. The hospital authority said around 40 of its staff in various hospitals tested positive. Health officials, meanwhile, apologized for COVID patients having to wait for a long time to get beds because capacity has been stretched thin.
We're talking about the strategies of how we handle a huge numbers of patients. And actually, we share the direction that we try to limit hospital to handle those needy groups, including those elderly, those small kids, and also other special considerations such as patients with the major medical background or maybe the pregnant.
Other groups will be sent to Asia World Expo and Penny's Bay, which will open Phase 2 with 1,200 rooms. Authorities are also preparing to expand capacity at Asia World Expo. Beijing is likely to lend a helping hand as Hong Kong battles its 5th wave, according to a former hospital authority chief. This comes as an SAR delegation prepares for crucial talks with mainland officials. Maisie Mock reports.
Chief Secretary John Lee headed a high-level team that left for Shenzhen today on the eve of a meeting with mainland officials to discuss Hong Kong's Omicron crisis. The meeting comes amid scenes of people lining up for hours to get tested. Many complained that it took them 2 days to get the results. Former hospital authority chief Anthony Wu said the long time spent waiting in line is unfortunate, noting that there are limited testing centers in Hong Kong. Wu, who now heads a company providing testing services, said Beijing is expected to provide Hong Kong with whatever it needs to overcome the crisis.
I think Beijing is prepared to entertain whatever requests we make. So if you look at how do we fight the COVID, I think testing is one thing, and then how do we sort of quarantine or isolate those infected people? I think these are 2 major areas that we could seek help from the mainland.
The additional Fire Eye laboratory at the Ma On Shan Sports Center is scheduled to start operations on Tuesday to triple the city's daily testing capacity to 300,000. But Wu said that it's not enough unless there are more lab technicians to boost testing capacity tenfold.
On the basis that we may need to do about 3 to 4 million tests a day, and when we need to triple the 5 eye labs, the 佛眼实验室, then we probably need 1,000 people from Beijing to help us to do testing in the laboratories.
The pro-establishment DAB, meanwhile, urged Chief Executive Carrie Lam to get help from Beijing. The party said the government should set up at least 3 more Fire Eye laboratories and deploy at least 1,000 people to test samples. The DAB also suggested building mobile hospitals to take care of patients as public hospitals are running out of space. Maisie Mock, HKIBC.
There are complaints that electronic ticketing machines at 10 COVID testing centers have not made much of a difference. There were still long queues as people waited for hours to get tested. There were more long lines today, starting from early morning, as people waited for COVID tests. At one venue, the Shek Tong Tsui Sports Center in Sai Ying Pun, those who had bookings were let in first, angering those who had been queuing. This couple at the front had arrived at 2 a.m. to ensure they could get a slot before work. After some arguing, they were let in. In the government's latest attempt to minimize crowds, 10 ticketing machines for testing were placed across the city. Staff handed out over 10 tickets every half an hour, with the person's phone number written down. Scanning the ticket's QR code on a mobile app can tell the holder the status of the queue, but the information on the phone caused some confusion. 0, what does this mean? My ticket says 282. Where's my turn? Demanded this man who sought an explanation. Others with tickets noted that the wait time had remained the same and wondered whether to step out of the queue as their tests were due in an hour. Molecular Pathology Diagnostic Center Director Chris Wong said in a radio show that the machines would make little difference, as test takers still needed to queue if there were too many people. He added it may be difficult to hand out all tickets through the electronic system, as some elderly people may not use smartphones. The government has extended a flight ban from 8 countries and added Nepal to the list. The Himalayan country was included because of a high number of imported cases from there. Passenger flights from the other 8 countries will be suspended until March 4th. They are Australia, Britain, Canada, France, India, Pakistan, the Philippines, and the United States. Overseas, diplomatic efforts to diffuse tensions over Ukraine are making little headway following a frosty meeting between Britain and Russia. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia said it was like talking to a deaf person when he met his British counterpart, who offered little compromise.
And I can't see any other reason for having 100,000 troops stationed on the Ukrainian border apart from to threaten Ukraine. And if Russia is serious about diplomacy, they need to move those troops and desist from the threats.
Russian President Vladimir Putin struck a conciliatory tone, saying the Kremlin is preparing a written response to the United States and NATO. U.S. President Joe Biden, meanwhile, urged Americans to leave Ukraine and said he won't send soldiers to evacuate them. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who met his Indo-Pacific allies in Melbourne, vowed to respond to Russian aggression with financial sanctions and export controls. The head of London's Metropolitan Police has resigned amid a string of controversies that undermined public confidence in the force.
It is quite clear that the Mayor no longer has sufficient confidence in my leadership of the Metropolitan Police Service for me to continue as Commissioner. He has left me no choice but to step aside. I say this with deep sadness and regret.
Last week I made clear to the Metropolitan Police Commissioner the scale of the change I believe is urgently required to rebuild the trust and confidence of Londoners in the Met and to root out the racism, sexism, homophobia, bullying, discrimination and misogyny that still exists. I am not satisfied with the Commissioner's response.
The highlight of Dick's 40-year career was in 2017, when she became the first woman to head Britain's largest police force. But she was criticized over her handling of the murder of a woman by a police officer last year. Despite earning the disapproval of the mayor, who's from the opposition Labour Party, Dick was praised by Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Home Secretary Priti Patel for her dedication to public service. And coming up after the break, tensions rise in Ottawa as truckers continue their anti-vaccination protest in the Canadian capital. And Americans complain about rising prices as inflation hit a 40-year high.